All right, I think it's time to start. So may I have your attention, please? So good evening, everyone. Let's do it the Brooklyn way. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Okay, very good. So I would like to welcome all of you to this session entitled "The Ethical Issues in Human Subjects Research." The reason we entitled this session is because there are a lot of issues when it comes to doing research that requires human subject participation. And it is very, very historical. It starts from the 1960s. There were so many problems. In the 1970s, all of you who have done human subject research, you have to go through the IRB process. You have to go through the CT process to get credentialed before you can do research, because a lot of things happened in the past that are really, really problematic. And it actually puts into doubt the intent of researchers, and then how people are supposed to participate without knowing what the intent really looks like. So it is very important that we have this session and to be able to discuss the various issues around it, but particularly highlighting one very specific personality who really changed the world, and that is Miss Henrietta Lacks. Ms. Lacks is going to be introduced very soon in the course of the program. Her contributions are unbelievably outstanding, and they have resisted generations and generations of scientific rigor, and all the cancer studies that are done right now in the United States and across the world actually depend on the HeLa cells for discovery, toxicity, and all that stuff. So today we are very fortunate that her grandson, who carries the history and knows a lot more than what we will ever know, is with us today. His name is Mr. Alfred Lacks Carter. Could you stand and be recognized, please? Mr. Lacks Carter is joined with his wife, Ms. Jewel Carter. Could you stand and be recognized? They will be telling us the story about how these cells came into being and what their grandmother did to contribute to the science that we know today. But I'm really proud of our team that brought this together, and I want to mention Laura Martello-Rooney. Could you stand and be recognized? Dr. Powderly, for actually having the concept. When we actually started planning for tomorrow's conference, and tomorrow's conference, I'm going to tell a little bit about that. Tomorrow's conference is about trying to meet the requirements of a particular NIH grant that we had, a collaboration between us, SUNY Downstate, and then Cold Spring Harbor Labs, a research facility in Long Island, and SUNY Stony Brook. The three institutions came together to address the issue of health disparities, cancer health disparities in minority populations. And we've been doing this for 4 years, trying to figure out why do African Americans and other minority populations get cancers that fast and die very early? Is it because of post-translation modifications? Is it because of environmental issues? But our job is to figure out what the biologic differences are in cancer prevalence, GI cancer prevalence in these populations. So tomorrow is going to be a very good conference. But as part of that arrangement, as we were inviting Mr. Alfred Lacks Carter to come and give this presentation tomorrow, we realized that there's actually a need for us to have this open forum where he can actually share, because tomorrow is tight, and I don't think that we have enough time to be able to go through everything. So, talking to Ms. Powderly, we realized that the best thing to do was to have another session where we'll have an open forum, get people to ask questions. I'm sure you all have questions, so feel free to voice them out and get to understand his experience working with several communities, including the NIH, on this same very subject. So I'm really very happy that you have come. Welcome to Downstate. We're so proud of what you have done. He's a public speaker. He speaks on the world stage across the globe, trying to make people understand what that means in terms of ethics and how to participate in human subjects research, that kind of stuff. So his contributions are also very genuine. So I would like to thank all of you for also coming to listen to the story, and I'm sure that we are going to have a great session tonight. So those are my comments. So I'm going to now invite Dr. Powderly to come to the podium and make some few remarks on the ethical issues in human subjects research. You all know Dr. Powderly already. She is fantastic, phenomenal figure at Downstate. She's actually the president of the Faculty Senate, right?
No, well, no, but I am on the Senate Ethics Committee now.
And now she's on the Senate Ethics Committee. She is the director of the John Conley Division of Medical Ethics and Humanities and the Department of Medicine, and also does a lot of stuff with other departments in the institution as well. So welcome, Dr. Powderly.
Thank you. It is awesome to see so many students here. That's great. I'd like to thank, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes because I really think we want mostly to hear from Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I'd like to thank Dr. Salafu and Dr. Martello Rooney for the opportunity to collaborate on today's open forum and tomorrow's symposium. Disparities are, by definition, ethical issues, and this is obviously a very important collaboration for my division. I'd also like to acknowledge Jenny Paredes, Dr. Martello Rooney's PhD student and one of my Conley scholars, whose passion for health disparities has fostered this collaboration and also helped to make today's forum as good as it could be. I'd especially like to acknowledge my generous benefactor, Dr. Monica Conley, and the John Conley Foundation for Ethics and Philosophy in Medicine. Dr. Conley's support allows us to bring events such as this to Downstate. And most importantly, I'd like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Carter for trekking to Brooklyn to share their family's story with us. I had the opportunity to hear several members of the family speak several years ago at a primer meeting, and I told them afterwards that their grandmother would be very proud of them. Indeed, they have turned a terrible event for their family into an opportunity for us to learn from our mistakes and to do better in the treatment and research involving vulnerable populations. The legal doctrine of informed consent in this country dates back to 1914 in the Supreme Court decision in the case of Schloendorf versus the Society of New York Hospital. Every human being of adult years and sound mind has the right to determine what happens to his body according to that decision, although Ms. Schloendorf was a woman. We still weren't doing a very good job with the process of informed consent for treatment in 1951, although Mrs. Lacks did sign an operative consent at Johns Hopkins. Consent for research was even more limited, and consent for tissue research was non-existent. Tumor cells were collected without consent. Most died in the lab, but not Henrietta's. They were unique and quite prolific, loaned to other labs, sold for profit, and are still alive today. And Dr. Roman is going to tell us a little bit about them in a bit. The story of Henrietta Lacks joins the stories of the Nazi doctors and the Tuskegee syphilis study as one of the most important case studies in bioethics, medical ethics, public health ethics, and research ethics. And there are several things that I think are especially unique and important about Mrs. Lacks' story. Her doctors at Hopkins, who are highly regarded in their field, were not bad physicians, nor were they bad people. They were desperately trying to learn about cancer in an effort to help their patients. They were very excited that these cells might help foster that work. However, the slope often becomes slippery. Mrs. Lacks left behind a husband and 5 children who struggled to survive in poverty in Baltimore while her cells were generating not only knowledge, but a great deal of money. On discovering that the cells still existed, her daughter Deborah, your mother, right, said, "But I always thought it was strange. If our mother's cells done so much for medicine, how come her family can't afford to see no doctors? Don't make no sense," and indeed, that's the case. The story of Henrietta Lacks and her family helps us to understand the importance of the ethical treatment of human subjects and the impact of research participation on subjects. This family could have responded with continued anger. They could have sued. However, their foundation has worked with Johns Hopkins and the NIH to promote Henrietta's legacy and to use her story to influence research policy and practice. I am deeply grateful that Mr. and Mrs. Carter have joined us today, and I really look forward to hearing from them. And before we got just a couple more remarks, Dr. Martello Rooney is going to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Carter, and then Dr. Roman, she'll introduce Dr. Roman.
So welcome, and I just wanted to say a few remarks. My students and I were very fortunate to cross paths with Mr. Carter at the AACR conference on the science of cancer disparities, and then again at the AACR annual meeting, and so it was very fortuitous that we were able to then invite you, and we're very thankful for you having accepted our invitation. And, you know, this is very important for us to, as Dr. Powderly mentioned, for them to share their story and to support really the research that we're attempting to do here, which is focused on GI cancer disparities. Dr. Powderly and I hope both events are equally informative as they are thought-provoking. And next, Dr. Christopher Roman, Vice Chair of Research, is going to give some remarks regarding the HeLa cells.
So I too will be brief. It's great to see everybody. So I think I can speculate or sort of reflect more on, I think, how the legacy of your grandmother really transformed the culture of science. I think, you know, the impact of having human cells to work with over 50, 60 years ago just completely transformed medicine, and it's really impossible to, it's an immeasurable impact on global humanity and alleviating human suffering based on all the discoveries that were made possible by having these human cells to work with. And so that's a type of gratitude that there are really no words for. But where I can sort of reflect on as a basic scientist in the lab, I do remember when I first started my postdoctoral research, I had not worked with human cells before, but almost on the first day, I can remember hearing about these special cells called HeLa cells, and there was something very magical about them that was also very mysterious, because as much as everyone acknowledged the importance, where they came from was very mysterious. There was speculation on what the 4 letters meant, so people came up with different names, but there was always in everyone's mind the person behind these cells. And it really wasn't until, you know, decades or so later where I think, you know, the scientific world and society at large really appreciated, you know, the humanity and really the shared, how important it is to acknowledge the other lived experiences of everybody, you know, as a culture of Americans, to know the history, know the experiences that your grandmother had, and really respect and acknowledge that. And so I guess in closing, you know, again, there's no way to express gratitude to have that type of enlightenment, to be able to express or to know that there's such appreciation and respect that needs to be made. Thank you. Thank you to Mrs. Henrietta Lacks, and thank you for being here.
My name is Alfred Lacks Carter. I'd like to say thank you for coming, and it's just good to see that people are interested and people are concerned about bioethics and just basically doing what's right when it comes to the medical field. My mother is Deborah Lacks, the daughter of Henrietta Lacks. My grandmother Henrietta and her husband David moved here, not here, but they moved to Baltimore from Clover, Virginia, for better opportunities. Years after they were in Baltimore, my grandmother developed a tumor, and she went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where they diagnosed her with cervical cancer. Now, back then, treatment was very barbaric. They were taking radium and actually sewing it onto the tumor, which was basically burning her from the inside out. At this time, she had 5 children. 4 of them were very small. My mom was 2 years old when my grandmother passed away. And my youngest uncle, he was 1 year old. My oldest uncle, he was 16 years old when Henrietta passed away. So when she passed away, it did a great deal of psychological damage to my uncle. and also my granddad. I think my granddad, he basically tried to block it out of his mind as much as he could. Thus, this is the reason why years later he never wanted to talk about it. He never wanted to discuss it. So growing up, we never really knew much about Henrietta. It wasn't like a talked about thing. All we knew was that our grandmother passed away at a very young age. We knew nothing about the HeLa cells. We knew nothing about the contributions that she had made to this world. It wasn't until, I think it was like the early 1970s, my oldest uncle Lawrence's wife, Babette, was at her friend's house, and she had a guest over, and he worked, I think he worked in Bethesda, Maryland, where the NIH is, and he was, he introduced, well, the young lady introduced my aunt to her friend as Babette Lacks, and he was like, Babette Lacks? He said, would you happen to be related to Henrietta Lacks? And she said, that's my husband's mom. And he got to telling her all these stories about all, you know, the advancements and the experimental things that they were doing with the HeLa cells. And she was like, wow. And she went back and told my uncle, and he shared the news with the family. And so that was like the beginning of the exposure of who Henrietta Lacks was, because like the gentleman said earlier, you know, people really didn't know what HeLa meant or what it stood for, the definition of it, because they were saying it was Helen Lane and Helen Lawson. You know, they were just making up all kinds of names to disguise who this African American woman was, because this is what they didn't want people to know, that she was African American, a person who made so many contributions. So Rolling Stones had did a article, a very in-depth article on Henrietta and the HeLa cells, and that was like the beginning. So at this time, you know, different people were approaching the family, and, you know, my granddad, he wanted no parts of it. My uncles, for their own reasons, they didn't want to deal with this issue. And, you know, it was my mother, it was her determination to find out who her mother was. Like, could you imagine, you know, growing up without a mom, not knowing the things that she liked, the things that she didn't like? So that was the determining factor of her making up her mind to say, I'm going to do this. So it was a young lady, excuse me, it was a young lady named Rebecca Skloot, who authored The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And she reached out to the family. After many attempts, my mother finally gave her a chance, because, you know, they felt like the family had been taken advantage of so much, and they didn't want that to happen again. So it was a 10-year journey for Rebecca and my mother to collaborate and make this book a reality. Unfortunately, my mother passed away 8 months before the book was published. So everything that's happening now, the book, which is required reading in so many universities and so many high schools and middle schools, the movie, which was nominated for Emmy, Oprah Winfrey played my mother in the movie. How many people seen the movie? Did you all see me in the movie? I had a short part. I had a speaking part in the movie, too.
What were you in the movie?
I was the turn the station man. I was the person that was in line. I was the first person in line at the hospital to donate blood for Henrietta. I had on the round glasses.
Now I'm gonna have to see it again.
Yeah, they made me cut my beard off. They said it looked too up to date. I really didn't know what that mean because they had razors back then. So you know, all these things that are happening now, you know, my mother, you know, she's not here to witness it. So it's my honor and my pleasure to continue the legacy of Henrietta Lacks the best that I can do. We have a very large family, and everybody has their own ideals. Everybody has their own opinions. Everybody has their own way of dealing with things. You know, some people want to sit back and get a hand. You know, I don't believe in that. You know, my grandmother left a platform for us to be able to go out and to enlighten people on her life. So when the movie was being filmed, I got a chance to meet Oprah. Well, Oprah called me, and well, actually, I met her in Baltimore. She wanted to meet the whole family, but she especially wanted to meet me and my sister and my nephew and my son to have a better understanding of how to play my mother. So we developed a good rapport, and when we went to Atlanta, I took her to dinner. Yeah, I did take Oprah to dinner. I took her to dinner, and I paid. Look, I was a little nervous because we went to a restaurant that didn't have any prices on the menu. And Oprah was ordering up some stuff, I'm telling you. And I was just...
So much for weight loss.
Right. And I was like, look, I don't know if my debit card is going to be able to hold this. But glory be to God, you know, I was able to pay it. And, you know, the time that I spent with her at that dinner, it was very enlightening. She gave me a lot of advice and a lot of wisdom on how to proceed with my life. Because, you know, in the past, I've made a lot of wrong choices. I made a lot of wrong decisions because I was around a lot of bad people. I went to prison. I paid my debt to society, and now I'm changing lives. I expressed to Oprah that at first I told her I wanted to be an actor because everybody told me I did so good in the movie. I was like, oh, I want to, you know, try my hand at this acting thing. She was like, no, Alfred, no. I was like, oh, I just want to just try. She was like, no. She was like, maybe I'll let you be on Greenleaf or something as a as a deacon or something, but no. She said, your mission is to help people, because I expressed to her that I wanted to open a transitional housing program for men returning home from incarceration. So that's what I have right now. I have a house in Baltimore. It's called the Henrietta Lacks House, and it houses 6 men, up to 6 men, and I'm helping guys return back to society. I have a guy that just came out of federal prison not even 2 weeks ago. Tony Wright was incarcerated for 30 years. He came out and he was placed into the federal halfway house. He was there 5 months. He was released from there with no resources, no place to go. So he tried to get help, but he couldn't get help. So when you don't get help, what you do, you revert back to what you know. He did 30 years for bank robbery. What did he do? He went into a bank. He told the teller, I have a bomb, give me the money. She gave him the money. He didn't even take the money. He walked outside, went across the street and sat on the curb and waited for the police to come get him. And he was just released again 2 weeks ago into my program. I went to court. I went to sentencing for him, and it just took a lot, and he just need help. So he's in my program right now. I'm helping him get all the necessary paperwork he need. He's getting ready to get a job. His social skills is like diminished. I took him to a food market to get food, and it was just too much going on for him. He did all right, but once we got back in the car, he was like, man, it was overwhelming for me. I was like, wow, what's wrong? He said it was just too much going on at one time, like, because he's not used to that. So, you know, transitioning back into society is a big thing. And that's my goal, that's my mission, to save lives and to help people stay out of prison. I mean, because you can come home from prison, that's easy, but staying home is the hard part. So other than that, keeping my grandmother's legacy alive, I'm working closely with some people in Baltimore. It's called the Henrietta Lacks Legacy Group. And we went to Washington, D.C., and we're in the process of getting Henrietta on a postage stamp. Awesome. Also, we have a highway dedicated to Henrietta in Baltimore. The street she lived on, the main street, is now called Henrietta Lacks Place. My organization was instrumental in getting that done. There's a plaque on the house that they lived in. It's just amazing to be able to recognize and to keep Henrietta's legacy going, because she's done so much for this world.
And Johns Hopkins is about to name a building for her, right?
Absolutely. They're building a building right now, and they're going to name it after Henrietta. A lot of people say, why don't they give the family the money? You know, I mean, you know, like I said, there's a platform there. So, I mean, if Johns Hopkins was to write a check to my family for what Henrietta done, you know, they couldn't put enough digits on the check, you know. So, and plus it will open up the floodgates, and, you know, they don't want to do that. They don't want to accept that responsibility, so they do other things to try to, I don't want to say appease, but they're just doing things to show their, you know, their thank you to the family.
Didn't Rebecca Skloot establish a foundation as well for some of your family members to be able to go to college and things like that?
Yes, it's called the Henrietta Lacks Foundation, and there's money there for family members to go to school. I have numerous cousins who went to medical school. I have some now that are in nursing school. I have one that went to school to be a school teacher. Actually, she's a new mom. She just had a little girl like 3 weeks ago. My nephew, Davon, that was in the movie also, he went to truck driving school. He has his own truck. So, yeah, she did a lot for the family as far as the foundation.
That's awesome. That's all I can say. I mean, like I said, you really, have done an amazing amount to make your grandmother proud. And that's really just an important, stories don't always end that way. I know your mother had a bunch of different reactions when she first found out, because it wasn't long before that conversation where, where they figured out, where your family first found out that the cells were being used, that they had actually identified them as Henrietta Lacks cells, right? For a long time, they were just HeLa cells. Nobody. Absolutely. And that's when I asked Dr. Roman to make some comments. I said, just talk about the fact that these cells are everywhere in every research lab. But did anybody ever think about they came from somebody? Who were they? Right.
Actually, I had a chance to. I went to. I can't think of the name of the university. It's in upstate New York. I can't think of it, but I got to hold the vial with the HeLa cell in it for the first time. It was just an awesome feeling. It was amazing.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your narrative with us and your journey and allowing us to be part of your family. And as Dr. Roman said, we often talk about the HeLa cells as cells in a vial. I know you were not born when Ms. Lacks was around and your mother was very young, but just from what you've gathered from your aunts and your uncles, tell us a little bit about the person, behind the cells. What did your uncles and aunts tell you? Did she cook? Did she sew? Who was she, from what you know?
From what I know, from what I've heard, Henrietta was a very giving person. And they tried to capture that in the movie. They said she would feed anyone. We had people coming to the house posing as cousins. There wasn't even cousins, right? And she would still
Sounds
feed
like my
them.
family.
They said that she loved red nail polish. She was very, very neat. I know they tried to say that she was poor and tobacco farmer, but she wasn't poor. And you can see by the pictures, it's not a lot of pictures in circulation, but the pictures that they do have of her, you can see that she wasn't a poor tobacco farmer. She might have been a tobacco farmer, but she wasn't poor like that.
Poor and proud are not mutually exclusive. Right?
Exactly. So she was just the backbone of the family. And she was always smiled. And they said she was a matchmaker too. Yeah, they said she was a matchmaker.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Oh, now I remember the Hamilton College. Yeah, I'm getting a little old. It kind of skipped me a little bit.
We've all been there. Anyway, does anybody have any questions they'd like to?
Come on, don't speak at once.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Was it a difficult decision to work with John Hopkins after what happened?
Yes, very difficult because, you think of what they done, and it.
I said, was it a difficult decision to work with John Hopkins after everything that happened? And
Yes, it was a very difficult decision. But I look at it like, all the bad things that they done, you have to look at the good that came out of it. And you have to look at it in a positive light, because what she's doing for humanity right now is just, I mean, you can't measure that. So when I go to these speaking engagements and I see all the students that are engaged, and people come up to me and have tears in their eyes and tell me that, you know, your grandmother changed my life, she saved my life, I have children because of your grandmother, because of the in vitro fertilization, you know, all these things are positive. So you have to overlook the negative. You have to.
And I think that especially, I mean, the bioethics people at Hopkins are colleagues of mine, and I know that they've worked very closely with some of your family members to make sure that I mean, I think there are some scholarships and there are, you know, different events, right? And recognize that we made a mistake, but it wasn't that some, you know, evil guy was in a laboratory like with Frankenstein, you know, but at some point you have to recognize that there were certainly people making a lot of money from these cells, and we just had not, you know, thought about the fact that, and I think that money maybe belonged in part to the people she left behind.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Are there other questions?
Oh, poor Carlos doing the running around.
I can run around. Thank you for sharing more about your grandmother's story. So I'm also thinking about, you know, challenges since then. I think another way that your grandmother's cells, your grandmother has taught us, you know, so much and continues to challenge us relates to, you know, we're in this new age of like sequencing, genomic sequencing. Mm-hmm. And that really challenges our relationship to, you know, what is our identity? How do we protect our privacy? And this came up a couple of years ago. It was like another challenge to the Lacks family about, you know, protecting genetic information. And that was like just a few years ago. I don't know if people are aware, but this happened. A European laboratory sequenced HeLa, one of the strains of the HeLa cells. So they had all the blueprints, all the genetic blueprints in those cells. So arguably, they changed quite a bit, but as Dr. Laura Martello-Rooney knows very well, we're using the field of cancer is using that genetic information to help identify, you know, why cancer is different based on ancestry. But that also reveals the genetics about members of the Lacks family. So I'm wondering if you could comment, like what was that? How did the family sort of react and come together around that? Because what's happened now, I think, is a really revolutionary new paradigm for engaging, I guess it's a version of community in decision-making about research. Like, because your family, and I don't know if you're on the board?
No, I'm not on the board, but two of my cousins are. Okay. So what happened was, like you said, someone put on the internet, you know, the HeLa cell, and it had to deal with like the sequencing and the genome and things of that nature. So it was kind of like here we go again, sort of thing. So NIH reached out to the family, and we all went to Bethesda, Maryland, and we had a meeting with them, and so the conclusion was, it was either we say no, we don't want this to be like this, or we can say, okay, yeah, but we want to have control of who has the HeLa cells and what they're going to do with them. Sort of like a, hey, who's that?
Yeah, who is that? Where'd that come from?
Oh, that's the security guy up there. He good. So, two of my family members, they sit on the board of the NIH, and what people have to do now, they have to fill out an application, and they have to write a detailed description of what they're going to do with the HeLa cell. and it's either yay or nay with the family. So as long as it's ethical and it's for positive results, they go along with it.
But that's an amazing model. Can I ask for a student volunteer to handle the microphone so Dr. Lieutenant Foster can come back up here?
You'll do it.
Never mind. Dr. Roman's going to do it. Thanks, Dan. I mean, that's an amazing model because, when the NIH, when the decision was made to map the human genome, which is, of course, a very successful initiative, for the first time they recognized before the ethical issues arose that there would be ethical issues. And there was something called the ELSI project, Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications of the Human Genome. And it was a tiny amount of money in an NIH budget, but it was a huge amount of money in bioethics. So a lot more bioethicists got into genomics than would have without those grant incentives. But it's, it allows us to think about the issues kind of before they arise, And I think the history lessons, from your grandmother's story, at the time, we have to put ourselves back in the position of the researchers in 1951 and the doctor-patient relationship in 1951. And they didn't set out to do anything bad, but they also had these amazing cells, and not long thereafter, there was money involved. And then there's, where's that money go? And, we spend a lot of time in our IRBs now looking at consents for use for tissue because we don't know what the implications are 20 years from now. And so it's really important in the idea that, this genetic material belongs to your family. And I think it's amazing that, as you said, you could have said no. Nobody can have any more HeLa cells. But recognizing that they had been the basis for blood pressure medicines and in vitro fertilization and vaccines and all these amazing things is instead, I think this is a very positive reaction and response. And so if somebody wants to use those cells, not only should they be able to pay for them with money going not only to a drug company, but they should be able to, as you said, say why they want to use them. What do they want to do with them?
So, no, thank you. These are some really important questions, but I'd like to ask a more provocative question. Race and racism and what happened to your grandmother. So how do you put that in context?
Well, race, as we know, played a important role back in 1951. Black people, which was known as coloreds back then, they couldn't go to certain hospitals. They couldn't go to certain anywhere. So race and racism played a major part. In my opinion, her treatment and just the way that she was, treated back then. And then after her death, like years later, because she was African American, they didn't want to expose who she really was. They were trying to say she was somebody else. And even to this day, in my opinion, if she was a white woman, the family would be paid. That's my opinion. I don't think that, I really don't think that, if she was white, we would have to, lobby for this, and it would just be given. It would be done as good faith. Like, it's a good faith gesture. Like, come on now, this lady who contributed to the entire world, like in everything as far as medical is concerned. And she's in every laboratory across this world, you know, in all kinds of medical centers. She's everywhere. She's ubiquitous. Y'all didn't know I knew that word, right?
They're all gonna
We knew.
You know, so I think they would be like, well, we have to do this. Let's just write them a check for $1 billion and leave it at that. You know, but, you know, this is the real world, and certain people are in power right now, and they're making racism okay again. It's never been okay, but they're trying to make it okay again. And, you know, I hate to go this, but you took me there.
That's
I'm
right.
sorry. Sorry.
You know,
But we're keeping it real.
yeah, we're keeping it real. So
New York City, we know this guy that's the president.
absolutely, I wouldn't even call him that. You know, so, you know, people are, I want to say taking off their hoods, but they're putting them back on. And it's just a shame that, you know, society in this world has come. I'm not going to say we came so far, because we haven't came far at all. But to revert back to, you know, where we came from, it's just sad.
No, thank you so much for your honesty, but I think if we are to move forward, we have to be real in terms of the context and why what happened to your grandmother happened. And it is possible, had she not been a black woman, things may have gone differently, not only for her, but for your family. So I think if we are to talk about the life and legacy of Henrietta Lacks, we must be honest about the social, political, and racial context in which she lived and ultimately died. So that's why I asked this question. Are there?
Although Hopkins is interesting, you know, much as we are, you know, we have a lot of our city hospitals that are connected to academic medical centers, right? And Hopkins was, I think, one of the few places in Baltimore, and it was probably a city hospital portion of it, that which would even care for black patients. So, you know, it's.
And you know why that was, right?
Why?
The rumor is that they were experimenting on black people. They were saying that you couldn't go outside after dark because Johns Hopkins would snatch you. And yeah, I mean, these are tales that as a kid you hear, but then when you get older and you see the evidence, these things could have been true.
Well, you had evidence in your own family.
You're right.
In the 1990s, there was a radiation advisory commission, primarily bioethics commission, to look at human radiation experiments in the Cold War, post-World War II. Those were largely white and middle-class people in those studies. And what came out of that was an apology, a presidential apology. And they picked a slow news day to release their report, but it happened to be the day of the O.J. Simpson verdict. So it got lost. But after that, a group of people in bioethics and in public health lobbied to get an apology for the men who had been the subjects in the Tuskegee syphilis study, who were, of course, African-American sharecroppers. And they did, in fact, get one. But, you know, it was after the fact. The white folks got it first, right? And then they're like, wait a minute, what about these people? You know, so I think that's why work on disparities and conversations like this are really important. You know, as you said, you think people portray your grandmother, first of all, as Helen Lane instead of Henrietta Lacks, but also as, you know, I mean, she might have been poor money-wise, but she was a wife, she was a mother. I mean, having what I've read about and what I saw in the movie, which came from your family, you know, the stories of, you know, she cooked, she danced, she liked to have fun with her friends. She was always, every picture I've seen, she was meticulously dressed.
With a hat.
You know, she was a proud woman, and a family, you know, a proud of her family woman, you know, so I think those are important things to remember.
Hello. So
Hi.
I'm wondering, given your grandmother's story, is there any mistrust or skepticism amongst your family towards either the healthcare field or medicine or research in general, especially given like the historic misuse of Black bodies in medicine and research?
Give her back the mic. Say that one more time.
So like amongst your family, is anyone, does anyone mistrust or look at the medical field with skepticism? Like, is anybody like turned off from the whole thing due to the history of your family and your grandmother?
Oh yeah, yeah. Excuse me. Like I said, you know, our family is very diverse. We like have our own opinions about things, and absolutely, my oldest uncle, he has a distrust. He doesn't attend any events. He don't speak about it. His son, he feels the same way. They were the ones who like launched a lawsuit against Johns Hopkins and HBO for doing the movie. Rebecca Skloot for writing the book. So yeah, there's like a distrust there, but that's to be expected. You know, everybody has their own opinion about things. You know, myself on the other hand, I try to view it in from a different perspective, and like when I met Miss Martella Rooney at the health disparities, I think it was in Atlanta, and then we met again in Chicago at the ACR. So I've been working closely with the health disparities and the ACR. So I'll be going to the thing that's coming up in Atlanta again, the end of next month. March 29th to April the 3rd, I think it is. And they want me to, well, they want to partner with me, the ACR. And like, who better to go to poor disproportionate neighborhoods and communities and speak to people that come from where I came from, that look like me, and to convey to them the importance of clinical trials and medication, because, like, you know, if they're developing all these medications and the only people who are participating is white people, you know, those medications really don't work on us. They might, but if you have African Americans and people of color participating in these trials, then these medications can save our lives. So that's going to be my mission. That's going to be my goal, is to try to get people, to try to bridge that gap, to let them know, look, these things happened in the past. They happened to me. They happened to my family. But we have to participate in these trials, because it might not help you. It might help you, but it might not help you. But you have to look at the people that's coming behind you. You have to be a trendsetter. You have to pave the way for the people that's coming behind you.
With the issue of, absolutely. But the issue of trust is really important, right? You know, I mean, and I say that often, people hear me say it in our IRB meetings, you know, that even though we have a study that might be, you know, relatively benign in terms of the potential harm, we have to think about our community, you know, and make sure that we're not violating their trust. We need to engage them. We need to include them. You know, the guy who wrote the book Bad Blood about the Tuskegee syphilis study is a close friend of mine, and that book came out in 1980, right? He still gets phone calls from physicians who are trying to do clinical trials saying, what is this Tuskegee study, and why won't people sign up for my trials, you know? And I mean, people in the community have a real, people of color, people in vulnerable populations, have a real reason, a whole host of historical reasons not to trust
Absolutely.
the healthcare system. And it's our job to make sure that we establish and maintain that trust. And, you know, it's also important, as you said, for people who look like and come from the background that our community, you know, to engage the community and people from the community, which is why this is such an important story to tell.
Absolutely. You have to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I so appreciate your comments. It really provokes lots of sadness in me, but also some really serious thoughts. I'm a nurse and a healthcare provider, but you've certainly raised, and this conversation has raised my concern about my trust of the healthcare system. As you talk, I think, oh my God, I don't trust the healthcare system either, much of the time. So we are in it together. But one thing I wanted to ask, it struck me when we were talking about money and compensation. So when people are going to give their pieces of their bodies for research, how do we compensate? Is there a good way to compensate them financially for that? Is there any way? So if I give some of my cells and somebody makes a lot of money because they found a cure for aging, how do we compensate me for that? I don't have an answer to it. It sort of raised a question in my mind. What do we do with that? If people make money off your cells.
I think, and that's a very important point. I think that when you go to the hospital and they take samples and they take, you know, blood samples and tissue samples from you, they already said that once they take it, it doesn't belong to you anymore. And I beg to differ. I think that they should have a right to take it for research, but I also think that if anything comes of it, like you said, then they should be obligated to inform you and to compensate you. I mean, I shouldn't be able to go in your backyard and steal your bike and enter in bike races and be winning all the bike races, and then I don't give you anything. I mean, it's just not right. It's not ethical. So you're right. I mean, I don't know how they would do that. And so I'm gathering that a lot of you are medical students, right? Nursing students. Okay. 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 Okay, so, you know, what I like to share with the students, you're gonna have pitfalls, you're gonna fail at certain things. Never give up. Never give up. You know, when things happen, it's just the enemy. It's just the devil trying to deter you from being who you are, walking into your greatness. And a lot of times when it seems like your back is against the wall, you might be down to your last dollar, your car broke down, you're not feeling well. 99.9% of the time, you're getting ready to break through to something great. So never give up. Never give up. And also I would like to say, when you're working with your patients, be respectful. Like a lot of times, like when people go to the hospital, when we go to the hospital, 9 times out of 10, we're not feeling good. So you might be disoriented, you might be discombobulated, whatever. And here they come with a stack of papers and just sign. you know, and you don't know what you're signing. Like, you're just signing away. So you as nurses and people in the medical field, take the time out to explain. Now, you don't have to explain every single page, but understand that everyday people like myself, we don't use the same terminology that you do. So we're not going to understand certain things. Miss Lady over here saying IRB. Like, I don't even know what IRB means. You know? See, there you go. It sound like a nightclub or something. You know. So, and just know that who you are working with is human beings. Like, I tell people all the time, you know, people are working with the HeLa cell and they're making advancements. All that is good. But remember, them HeLa cells came from a human being, a mother, of 5 children, a wife. You know, so you got to respect that. So respect your profession and just do good things. Be nice. I'm still trying to be a nice person. Just be nice. And all in all, I'm a good person. You know, my little stint in prison turned my life around. I still speed sometimes, but other than that, I'm a man of integrity. You know, I'm not going to do nothing I'm not supposed to. And I live my life like that. I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I was just telling him, I said, I wish I had the work ethic when I was younger that I have now. Like, I would be so much further in my life, you know, but everything happens for a reason. And I used, you know, what I went through as a learning process. You know, my past don't define me, it just qualified me for my future. My wife told me that.
That's right. Smart.
Quick comment, if I could, in regards to the donation of cells regarding aging. I think that would be different than the case of Ms. Lacks, your grandmother, as you mentioned earlier, because I feel like now there'd be so much more informed consent as it relates to the donation of the cells, whereas in her case, there may have been some light consent, but not informed to the level that we're accustomed to nowadays. But additionally, so I understand that there's been no monetary compensation per se, but buildings to be named after your grandmother, like scholarship for the families as well. How does that make all of you feel in terms of, is there pride with that? And how do you feel, I know you mentioned that had the family been white, you feel as though you would be compensated already, but how do you integrate those two feelings of the pride that you have of your grandmother's name being everywhere, but the fact that you were still wronged and not compensated adequately for what she has done for science and what all of us are learning today?
Well, I really think that, I mean, I'm proud. Like, I'm very proud that my grandmother's name is synonymous with immortality. Like, she's hanging in the Smithsonian in DC. So everybody can't say that. You know, I'm proud to say that my grandmother is Henrietta Lacks, my mother's mother. Like, I'm so close to her. Like, I never knew her, but, you know, I'm just like, it's like surreal. And like I said, I mean, you know, the monetary thing, like, would love to get paid, right? But the thing is, like I said before, there's a platform there. So you have to be smart enough and intelligent enough to know that a big institution, a conglomerate like Johns Hopkins and all these pharmaceutical companies, they're not going to give to a person or a family, but they'll give to a cause. So what you have to do is find that cause. and then present it to them like, look, I'm Henrietta Lacks' grandson. I have a transitional house that's helping men. I need y'all to help me out with a grant.
Just so the students know, thanks to the Conley Foundation, we are paying Mr. Carter.
You ain't have to say that.
I want you to know that we value your time.
Okay, well, I want my $100,000 when I leave. No, I'm just kidding.
Hi. So, black women are often ignored when we complain of pain or, not feeling well. So, are you aware, did your grandmother, what were her, precipitating symptoms to cervical cancer, and was she ignored? Or, what stage was it found?
I think it was stage 4. And as I don't want to say as black women, because I don't know nothing about that, but as being a black man, our pain tolerance is different, I think, because that's how we were raised. I'm pretty sure I done had broken fingers and just, thought I sprained it or whatever, but she was in a lot of pain, and I think it got unbearable to the point where she had to go to the hospital. And a lot of people don't know that she didn't go to Johns Hopkins first. She went to Dr. Wade. He is a doctor in Turner Station, Maryland, where she lived, who's African American also. And he was instrumental in getting Calvin Hill. Anybody know Calvin Hill? Calvin Hill played for the Cowboys, is Grant Hill's dad. Got him into, I think it's Brown University. Yeah, because Calvin Hill is from Baltimore also. So she went to him first, he diagnosed her, and then she went to Johns Hopkins.
I think one of the things I saw in reading the book was that, sometime after your mother found out that these HeLa cells were her mother's cells, but she also got access to her medical records.
And I have those.
And that it was, cervical cancer and the treatment of cervical cancer were very different in 1951, and it was both the cancer and the treatment were quite painful.
Mm-hmm. They were. Like surgery and things of that nature today is like light years ahead of what it was back then. Like, you have invasive surgery now. So, like I said, back then it was totally barbaric. It was just like a learning process, and they were just using who they could to learn.
I have a comment and a question. Just thinking about how her cells were used, how they were shelved and kept there. In medicine, we often dissociate, our patient. We don't see a person. We see symptoms, or we see, even in the anatomy lab, we see, the next assignment. We don't see this as a person. The hands you dissect, we don't think about that those hands held somebody. And that's why I think the initial feeling I got when I heard Henrietta's story was anger. But I'm meeting you today and seeing that you are not an angry person. And so that journey from, did you start off with anger, and how did you get from, that injustice and then transform it into something like this?
Well, I wasn't angry because, I wasn't angry because I know that she wouldn't be angry. Even with too close? Too far? No, for her. She needs to be a little closer. Okay.
Okay, I'm not talking now.
It's really, I really don't even need the mic. Really.
Well, he because they're
Because my
recording.
voice projects.
That's because you're an actor.
Absolutely.
It was that dinner with Oprah.
I was hoping we won that Emmy too, boy. I was in the audience. I was there. But even then, I think that Henrietta, if they would have asked her, I think she would have said yes. So, you know, there's no anger, there's no animosity, and like I said, just because of all the positive accomplishments, all the countless lives that she saved, I mean, you can't be upset and angry, you know, with that. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that could be a good question for a couple of my cousins, because I mean, you just said the opposite. You'd be like, why are you so mad? Like I don't know if y'all know about the Locks. He was like Mr. Rapper. He said, "Tell him why you mad, son. Tell him why you mad." You know, very angry.
But maybe if you look at all of your patients as people in your career because you listen to his story, that's all the more reasons not to be mad, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Could I pick up on sort of the theme, sort of a go there theme that Dr. Boone Foster brought up? You know, it gets back to this issue of trust and communication. And, you know, I remember when I was training and when I first, you know, learned about the HeLa cells, I was the person of color in my lab, and I was usually, and look at me. So I happen to be of Puerto Rican ancestry. You know, we were brown people back in the day. That's, you know. But so my point is, you know, how, you know, what are your thoughts about having a more, do you feel like science is representational? Do you think that there's any significance in that? Like, did you come across scientists of color when you were visiting labs? And if not, how did that make you feel? Do you think, you know, how does that fit into this whole dialogue that we've been having today?
Well, I mean, just like everything, like I think people of color need to be involved more. I've been going to different universities and meeting different scientists and things of that nature, and a lot of them are white. So I've been working closely with the MICR, which is the Minorities in Cancer Research, a group of, oh man, fantastic, intelligent young men and women. Like I be feeling like out of place when I'm with them. They be like, "No, you good," you know, and and you know, and I expressed to them like how happy I am that they chose the field that they're in, because we need more people of color in these positions and to change lives, because that's what they do. These doctors and these scientists, they change lives, and it's about 10 of them that I'm very close with, and they were the ones who encouraged me to try to partner with the ACR, because they said, "Look, man, you," and this is how they was talking to me. They wasn't talking to me in doctors' terms. They was like, "Look, man, you know, this is a way that you can get paid." You know, and we want you to do this because you deserve it, like your family deserve it. So that's why I'm partnering with the ACR, and like you all are the first ones to know. Y'all got the inside scoop.
Do y'all know what the ACR is?
Anybody know what the ACR is? It's the American Association for Cancer Research. It's based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I forgot the CEO's name. I can't remember her name. What's her name? The CEO of the ACR? Marg.
Yeah, the director is. I don't know his last name.
I think her name is Marg.
Mark, yeah.
Something.
And Sonia Springfield is the director of this party.
Yeah,
this
Miss
branch.
Springfield, she's out of the NIH.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, real nice lady. We had a nice time, didn't we? In Chicago.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, so obviously we're part of the minority part of ACR. Every time you talk to us, we're like, you're like a cancer celebrity to us, and it's so inspirational, so thank you for attending.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Do you have any final questions?
Just a comment. I'm from physical therapy, and I just wanted to, I'm so grateful to have heard you today. My whole PT class, the second year students were here today, and I teach them about research ethics in a research course we'll be doing later this semester. But man, what you taught them today was just invaluable in a way that I could never convey to them. I've already told them, I read your grandmother's, the book about your grandmother, and I told them, I said, when you have some free time, read that book. But they're so busy now in school, but for them to have come to this session today, they just learned volumes. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And also remember, when you read the book, in the back is a "Where Are They Now" section. In the book, the "Where Are They Now," I was the first person. It was Alfred Carter Jr. is in prison serving a 30-year sentence. Not anymore.
But again, that's just an incredible story of redemption, of taking that experience. And, we talk about and we teach about disparities and, social class and access and, you've taken your experience and turned it into something very different.
Thanks.
Mr. Carter also allowed us to record this, so tell your friends that it'll go up. I have a spot on my division's, iTunes podcast site that people can go and see it, which is awesome. But I would like to again thank you.
Yes,
thank you
so much. Thank you. And thank you for your family, Mrs. Carter, also. Thank you so much for sharing again, for really showing us the person behind the cells and that Henrietta Lacks family, woman, mother, wife, someone's daughter.
Right.
So thank you so much for sharing that.
Smiling down.
Yes, she is.